We should get started. You can remember that we were talking about classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, which is a particular way of thinking about how the organism starts to be able to react to its environment in ways that are kind of more adaptive, more intelligent. But it's a little bit limited. So we noted last time that really what classical conditioning gets you is a pairing between two kind of events in the environment. One event is the kind of event that makes your physiological system do something automatically. And the other one is initially meaningless. What classical conditioning does is it kind of expands your ability to respond to the environment, because that meaningless thing now starts to get the reaction, the physiological automatic reaction that that first stimulus got. Hopefully that all feels settled nicely with your understanding of what we talked about with the dog and the bell and the saliva and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's one way to do things. You can see how limited it is though, right? Because what you need is something that has that already gets a physiological response, and then only that physiological response can be extended out to other stimuli that happen to occur with that original stimulus, right? So yeah, works, and it seems to work maybe in some interesting ways, and maybe there are even some more nuances that would be surprising, but it as an explanation for everything that humans do, even everything that organisms do, probably not going to be enough. And they knew that, right? They were, I guess this is maybe a start, but probably not going to quite cover it all. Another attempt to make learning capture more of what we do and as humans and as other complex creatures comes from the work of this fellow, Edward Thorndike. At least it starts there with his ideas about instrumental conditioning. So Thorndike wanted to tie behavior into outcomes. Right? He wanted to make your behaviors more likely if they produce outcomes that you find positive. And by the same light, make your behaviors less likely if they produce outcomes that are unwanted, right? That are not nice, that are adversive. Okay, so organisms are learning to behave in manners that produce desirable outcomes. Covered it pretty well. You can see that's nothing to do with classical conditioning, right? Whether something becomes classically conditioned or not has nothing to do with its outcome. You know what I mean? Like it's not dependent on you going, oh, that was nice, let's do that again. Because you didn't really do anything, right? You were just strapped in as the dog. You had somebody move food in your mouth, right? You didn't have a choice. There's no choice involved. Your system just picked up a regularity and started to react to that regularity in advance of the food powder. So it's not like you're learning to behave in this kind of sense. It has nothing to do with the outcomes. So to do this initial work, Thorndike kind of made a couple of decisions about how to represent this problem, how to make it into a problem that take the problem that is the complex world, pull out some of its essentials and get it into the laboratory. So the idea for Thorndike is that the world is kind of like a continuing series of puzzles, of challenges that you need to figure out. So I need to invent a new behavior in the face of these challenges. Then I need to learn how to execute those behaviors as those challenges, or challenges like that challenge appear. Right? So it's kind of like analogous to a puzzle. Right? And by puzzle, I don't mean like a puzzle that you do, right, trying to match pieces, although kind of like that. I mean like a puzzle in the sense of I can put you in a situation like a, what are those rooms called? Escape room, kind of like that. Okay, so he's going to make essentially, oh yeah, it's an escape room. He's going to make an escape room for cats. And he calls those escape rooms, oh, sorry.
But how?
Anyway, you'll see the escape room here.
That was a question which began to fascinate Thorndyke. To answer it, he built some ingenious puzzle boxes from which cats could only escape by operating latches. And there you go. The cat appears to be very clever in engineering its escape, solving the problem with a deftly placed paw and a push of its nose. But Thorndyke didn't believe that an animal, even a clever cat, understands the consequences of its behavior. When he placed a cat in the puzzle box for the first time, Thorndyke was unable to see any evidence of insight. The successful actions appeared first by chance. He proved that the apparent cleverness arose by trial and error, and used graphs to measure the rate of learning. A well-practiced quickly recalls the actions that help it escape to its reward of food.
Okay, so that's pretty good. Let me stop. It's very lovely fellow right there. So these are the puzzle boxes. And the idea is that the behaviors are generated initially at random. And the random behaviors then are selected if they're successful and are learned, reinforced if they're successful. So it's a lot like a little, and this is kind of what he's going for, it's a little version of evolution, right? But at the scale of learning on this particular problem. Right? So it has the same kind of commitments to evolution. Like I can generate things at random, just like I can generate genetic variation at random without having to know what's good and what's not good in advance. Right? And then the selection process does the smart thing, which is if this is successful, increase its likelihood. See what I mean? So it's not like the cat's going, gee, I bet this lever here, I bet it's this lever. Right? As you know, we might having kind of a theory of how levers work and doors work and stuff. The cat's just like bat, light, whatever. And eventually something works. And the successful things become more likely. Right, so that's the kind of the story in a nutshell. You can see some of it here. This would be that wasn't Thorndike, by the way. So Thorndike was around the turn of the century, so there was no videography at the time. So this is time to escape from a puzzle box for one individual creature. So not only are the kind of the general trend in here, right, but all like what happened to this particular creature. Maybe they took that creature took a nap in the middle of the experiment. You don't know what's going to happen, right? So but we're looking at just one individual, but over lots and lots and lots of trials. Okay, so this isn't just one trial. This is average time over many, many trials. For some reason, this seems like a very prominent thing going on here on trial 20. Not really anything that anybody can explain, probably just random fluctuations for this particular cat. But what you're supposed to see here is a trend downward. By the time we get out to the 40th time you put the cat in the box, it's out of there relatively quickly. It's not actually that quick, right? It takes a minute and a half to perform. So the cat is getting better and better at the puzzle box, and this particular puzzle box is always the same each time. You can make it a lot harder by changing it, what it is, right? Here's a flip latch, here's a lift latch, here's a double latch, right? You could, in theory, do that, but that's not what's being done. Right, so the creature is clearly learning, the cat is clearly learning. And so he's excited about this, and the learning is instrumental in that it's getting the cat to, you can see at the end, that there's kind of implicit in all this a reward. The end state is better than the current state, right? So the end state, I get out, I get a little dish of food, yum, right? So now things are better, right? So it's instrumental in that it's producing a desirable outcome. So here is kind of schematically one way to think about it, and this is consistent with the way Thorndike is thinking about it. On the first trial, we have a tendency to perform these various actions. Okay, so think about the creatures having a repertoire of behaviors. Many, many, many things they do, just like you do. So here you are in the world, you can do anything right now. Right? There are some things that are more likely and some things that are less likely. And what they mean here by the darkening of these vector lines is the more saturated, the more likely, right? So the first thing, or the thing that's most likely, I should say, is to bite at the bars. Might work. Bite the bars, maybe they break, you're out of it. That could work. Jump up and down, meowing, so on and so forth. And then the things that are less, right, so they are becoming less and less probable, and you can just imagine all the things the cat could do. And then the correct thing, which is pulling at a string that gets the reward, is very less probable, right? But as you have done this many, 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 many times with trial and error, you as the cat have pulled the string, and that has become what we'll call later reinforced. And eventually, the probability of all these things is closing in on zero. The probability of this thing equals very, very high. So what Thorndike is trying to do here is keep it all kind of natural. By which I mean the cat doesn't have to have super smarts. The cat doesn't have to be able to anticipate or predict the future. The cat just is a random behavior generator that changes the probability of the behaviors in response to the outcomes. You know what I mean? So trying to avoid giving the cat too much. That's going to be a general strategy in behaviorism. Right? We're trying to keep the smarts out of the particular creature and kind of put the smarts distributed in the whole system. Right? So the reinforcement being part of the system. Does this make sense? So as I said, this was done around the turn of the century. He died in like 1949 or something. But he was working over the early 1900s. It kind of lay there, it was people were like, yeah, actually, we're going to cats. Good, like that. But it kind of began the people's thinking about a way to push on learning as a big explanation for what's happening with complex behavior. Because you'll notice that this is complex behavior. Right? Pulling a string, not that complex, but it's pretty complex. Somehow the cat's able to get there. So that is part of what drew people to this work. So, is there some physiological evidence for such things? Well, there is, and we're not going to get into that. But yes, there is some evidence still being developed that indeed stimulus and response tend to be connected by some properties of what we'll call a neural bond. And that's not a neural bond in the sense of glue or anything. But the strength of neural connections is able to be varied by the system, and it determines the probability of a response. That's what this PR stands for, given a particular stimulus. So there is evidence like that. How exactly that works, how exactly the system goes in and says, oh, I need these connections to be more strong and those other ones, you can drop those, is a big mystery, and certainly a focus of research. Jumping back out to the macro scale, it appears that the strength of connections generally is determined by what we call the law of exercise, which is essentially saying, if you use it, it'll become stronger. If you fail to use it, it'll become weak. Thorndike also proposed something that was called the law of effect. And in a way, it's kind of a expansion of that opening statement we had. So a response followed by a satisfying state of affairs is strengthened. So if I do a behavior in response to whatever's going on in the environment, and now I have a satisfying state of affairs, presumably because of what I've done, that the probability of that response is increased. If that response is followed by an annoying or somehow noxious state of affairs, then that state of affairs becomes weakened. And then there's also this little caveat: behaviors followed closely in time by a positive outcome are more likely to be repeated. So time kind of slips its way in there. There's something about time that he's noticing, and he wants to build it in. Not quite sure how that's going to work, right? This doesn't seem like closely in time. Maybe closely in time. What is that exactly? But something like that. So he's trying to point at the fact that long lags aren't very good for learning between stimulus and response. And he's right about that, but it's not clear exactly why. So as I said, this kind of lay around here for a while. People became interested. Watson came on the scene and was pushing the idea that behavior could be explained through association. But all through a classical conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning kind of framework, because that's where the main action was at the time. Then along came this fellow and a small army of supporters named B.F. Skinner. So Skinner wanted to make a more radical departure from what was being done in psychology. So Watson was good at promising great things. What Skinner wanted to really take the scope of psychology and narrow it down and turn it entirely into a conditioning world. Right? He wanted to see how much of behavior could be picked up by learning theory. He very famously developed a term called operant conditioning, which is not classical conditioning, but is a lot like instrumental conditioning, fleshed out a little bit more completely. So the argument is that we should think about behavior as being operant because it's designed to operate on the environment. So it is functional. It's about doing something. Classical conditioning tends to be more passive. As I said, you're strapped into the dog holder as the assistant approaches with the food powder. You don't have to do anything. But in operant conditioning, your behavior has to do something, and the consequences of doing something are the reinforcement, are the thing that make it more or less likely to happen again. Okay, so that's why he's calling it operant conditioning. So learning for Skinner and for his many, many followers is an association between behavior and its consequences. So you do something, that something has consequences, and those consequences determine the probability of that behavior occurring again. So that part, then it gets less simple from there. So this is a classic box. It's actually called the Skinner box. Can't see too well, but there is a floor here, which is made out of kind of like wire or little metal rods, which is kind of practical for a couple of reasons. One is brass being through both time, so they don't hold it very well. So you can just clean out the tray underneath and put it back under. So that's that. But you can also deliver shock to the 4 little feet of the rat. Be a stimulus. What you can't see here very well, I think, is a place for food to come out, and a button, or that could also be a light. Probably it's a button. So other features are usually lights to serve as stimuli, buttons to serve as sort of behavior collectors, essentially. Push the button, get a pellet. Light goes on, first stimulus, push the button, get a pellet. Okay, so you can see he's building this little world that's going to allow him to take control of all the contingencies, all the things that could matter to this little rat. Now, it's not a very complex world, but he's doing that on purpose, right? He's saying, I'm going to cut away everything else. I'm just going to make it this. So now I can say for sure what's going on with the rat. Okay, so that's the basic setup. So what can be done? Well, we've already talked about a little bit. We can apply things like rewards. You want to call them positive stimuli, like food. Rats really like food. We can apply things with some negative valence, like a little bit of shock, not enough to really damage the creature at all, but unpleasant. Nobody likes to be shocked. And other things as well, right? So you already saw like the loud noise. That's another kind of negative thing. So with a little bit of imagination, we can do such things. So this brings us to a very confusing set of distinctions, which I'm going to explain to you crystal clear. You are going to get this so clearly. You got to tune in, because if you don't tune in, this is not the sort of thing you look at later and go, oh, I get this. Okay, this is an important moment to understand these concepts. We have 2 different things. Unfortunately, they already have meaning for you. I ask you now to wipe those moves away. Okay, reinforcement, forget about it. Punishment, pretend you never heard the word before. Okay, they do not map onto your current concepts. Allow me to remap them for the purposes of operant conditioning. So reinforcement and punishment in the operant conditioning context mean particular things. They are things that affect behavior in particular ways. PowerPoint knows that you don't want to know about this, so but I'm going to insist that we do. Okay, so let's do reinforcement first, leaving punishment aside for a moment. Reinforcement is any stimulus that increases the likelihood of a prior response. Okay, so a couple of things have happened there already. It is something you're getting after making a response. It is, in order to qualify as reinforcement, it has to increase the likelihood of you making that response. So far, so good? Okay. That's the easy one. Okay, that's reinforcement. Something you're getting after making a response that increases the likelihood of you making that response. There are two different kinds of reinforcement. One of them is positive. Okay, so the strengthening of the likelihood of the prior response happens with a presentation of a positive stimuli. So you press the button and you get the food. Right? Positive stimuli. That has the food, we are saying, has a positive valence to it. Valence meaning value, right? It's like, yes, yummy, good, thumbs up. Right? That's what we mean by positive valence or positive stimuli. Right? So you press the button and you get the food. This seems pretty easy so far. I don't know what you're on about it without it being difficult. You can also have negative reinforcement. Here, the behavior, remember, we're still in reinforcement, so we're always increasing the likelihood of that behavior. Here, we're strengthening the likelihood of that behavior with the removal of some adverse stimuli. Yeah. Yeah, some people are looking confused, and I don't blame you. It seems weird, right? Yeah. Let me give you an example. Press the button to remove the mild shock on the floor. Creatures in the chamber, there's a little bit of electrical current on the floor. It's not very pleasant at all, right? It is nasty. And eventually they press the button, stops. The probability of pressing the button, okay, is increasing now, but because we have negative reinforcement, that is, we're strengthening the probability of removal of that's not going to help anybody. We're strengthening the probability of pushing the button by removing that adversive stimuli. So far, so good? It's weird, right, to have negative reinforcement. Okay, so a couple of additional things, and then we'll go on and make it worse. So positive is always something being added to change behavior. Negative is something being removed to change behavior. But it's reinforcement that changing the behavior is increasing its probability. Okay, more time. Positive is always adding something to change the behavior. Something in the collection of stimuli has changed. Negative is always removing something to change the behavior. Let me lay out the other side of this with punishment, and then we'll do questions and maybe some examples. Okay, so none of that is punishment, though. Okay? Punishment is this other case. It's only punishment if the stimulus decreases the likelihood of that prior response. Okay, so they stole the word punishment and they said, we're using it for this. In the situation where what you get decreases the stimulus, I'm sorry, it's really not going to help at all, decreases the likelihood of the prior response, we're calling that punishment. Let me give you some examples. You can have the ironically named positive punishment. With positive punishment, you're reducing the probability of the behavior with the presentation of an adverse stimuli, something negative. So for example, pressing the button and you get a shock. Right? That's positive punishment. Positive because something is being added, the shock, that's going to reduce the probability of you pressing that button again. Okay, so that's positive punishment. You can also have the more appropriate name perhaps. Negative punishment, where you reduce the probability of the behavior by removing something that's positive. Okay, so I have a bunch of food available to me. I press the button. The food drawer closes. Right, removing the food by pressing the button. Won't press that button again. I'm reducing the probability of doing the behavior by removing something that's positive. Right, so the negatives are always about removing. The positives are always about presenting. Okay. So hopefully the little example, like within the context of the Skinner box, those examples help. Let me do some examples that are not in the Skinner box that may or may not help. One of the weird things about this is that you have to sort of carve out a little piece of reality for yourself and now start to name the thing in it. So for example, let's do so some of the harder ones, right? The negative ones I think are particularly hard. So let's do a negative reinforcement situation like in the real world. Okay, so on my way over here, I walk out, I've got my raincoat open and my hood down, and I take about 3 steps and I get cold rain right on my head, down my back, right? It's nasty. It's an adverse stimulus. Okay. So what do I do? Well, because according to Skinner, I've experienced some of that before, I have ready to go some responses. And I'm now going to do something. Right? I'm not going to press the button, but I'm going to put my hood up. So that behavior removes the adverse stimuli of the rain going on my head, going down my back. It's negatively reinforcing. With me? So I'm more likely to do it next time because it worked. That would be part of the story. That's the reinforcement side. Ooh, that was good. Oh, put that hood up. Toasty. Right, got rid of that thing. Now I'm in a better condition. With me? I remove the adverse stimuli by doing something negatively reinforcing. Counterintuitive, right? It doesn't seem like that's where he's going to go with those words. A negative reinforcement has to be like negative. But the negative, again, is only about removing currently experienced adverse stimuli. Okay? Is that helping at all? Okay, so let's do a negative punishment example. Okay, so I go, well, let's do it. We can do some more. So we can do it all between here and the site building, right? So I walk out and now I have my hood up, but I still can see Lizzie's truck. You guys know about Lizzie's truck, right? Lizzie has a little food cart parked outside the site building. All right, so she has really nice food. If you haven't ever had it, give it a try. So I've been there many times. And so for me, that stimuli of seeing Lizzie's truck, right, is, right, so now I have that stimuli. And if I go over there, in that context, if I go over there, I have ray of stimuli. If I go over there and I have a nice sandwich, that's going to be positive reinforcement. Because the chances of my going over there again are going to increase by having a nice sandwich. Simple, right? That part hopefully is like nice, easy, straightforward. Okay. If, on the other hand, I go over there and her husband Joey's working, Clifton's here, nice guy, a little bit slow on the grill though. There's a long line. Hey. Some people are nodding like, yeah, I've had Joey serve me before. Yeah, it's slow. Nice guy, never can remember the order, so. Right? And there's a long line. When my pressing the button is going over there, let's say, see what I mean? So my going over to get my food, but Joey's working. Right? And so the negative removal of the positive stimuli, right? my positive experience of having the food now is at least delayed if it doesn't go all the way away. Okay. So you can try to squeeze things into this framework like that. Okay. Maybe a better one here would be to have the actual sandwich, right? So the positive stimuli is in my possession, right? I'm about to have my sandwich, right? And I do something like I walk over to my friend and I say hello. Okay, so now my walking over to the friend, say hello is like pressing the button, right? And it turns out that they're hungry and they want half my sandwich. So now half my food goes away. So I have kind of a negative punishment for going and approaching my friend, which is okay. I don't want to share. But okay, so you can see how that they made these frameworks that then they're kind of fit to different situations. And the theory, the reason why it works so well, the theory actually holds up pretty well across lots and lots of different situations. Like the framework kind of works. Okay, questions on all that? Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I think it works better as positive punishment, right? Because what I've actually done is I've run into an adverse stimuli, right? When I thought I was not going to. And so I went over there and instead of getting my food immediately, which would have been a nice positive experience, I actually get a presentation of an adverse stimuli. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That's a great point. Other questions? Yeah, so this is confusing, no doubt. The things to keep in mind are sort of the touchstones of the whole thing are kind of the top, I think the top level category definitions, right? That punishment is always about decreasing the likelihood and reinforcement is always about increasing the likelihood. And then that positive is always about something being added to change the behavior, and negative is always about something being removed to change the behavior. Okay, so that combined with these kind of iconic examples, right, I think help. Other questions? So let me tell you a little bit about some of what has come out of this work for, just hard to imagine how long this has been going on. It's been going on for like almost 100 years. People are trying to do this. Yeah. So one thing that's become very clear and is very practically important is that punishment, while it is kind of has a certain symmetry, right, with the rest of this thing, right? I mean, it seems adding something, taking something away, right, occurs in both situations. We should be able to change behavior in either direction. What difference does it make, right? Decreasing, increasing likelihood of behavior of response seems like, what's the problem? Well, it turns out that punishment doesn't work as well as reinforcement as a way to change behavior. And this is particularly true in humans, but it's actually true for animal training and lots of other types of training. So you may, if you go to a professional animal trainer for your pet or something, you might be surprised that that punishment isn't really much of a part of the program. It's all about reinforcement. I think it's interesting, and it probably has it at least has trickled in to some of like the child rearing literature as well. So problems with punishment. So one thing about punishment is that it tends to be confusing for the creature, the organism, the dog, the cat, the kid, because they are unsure what it is that they're supposed to see. We're supposed to be decreasing the likelihood of the prior response. I have to kind of back out here a little bit. So But which response? What thing that I just did resulted in that happening? You know what I mean? So I make a response, and now bad shit happens. Oh, okay, that's bad. But what did I do? How do I know what to assign the credit? And that situation tends to make learning unlikely if I'm uncertain how to resolve the credit. For reasons that aren't particularly well understood, that tends not to be such a problem with reinforcement, because reinforcement tends to pick out the thing. Right? I do it, I do something, I get a response, right? And if I have assigned credit to the wrong thing, I do that thing. Well, that is immediately not the thing. See what I mean? And so the next time I do it, now I try something else. So it's kind of, it seems to be a little bit more self-correcting, but punishment tends to be confusing for creatures. Because we because kind of bad things happen here, right? So either we have the presentation of an adversive stimulus or removal of a positive stimulus, the focus seems to be on the cause of the punishment itself or on whoever is delivering the punishment, right? Rather than on their own behavior. So if someone is delivering punishment, that person tends to be the focal point. It's not so much on their own behavior. And another problem with punishment, which I don't think is very well understood, but seems to be empirically true, is that the effects of punishment are only good for as long as someone is enforcing the contingency. So if this is a behavior that initially has a high probability, and then because you're punishing it, makes it have a low probability, as soon as that contingency is off, as soon as you're away, behavior goes right back to it. For reasons, again, that aren't well understood, reinforcement tends not to work that way. It tends to kind of mold behavior into something that's more stable and long-lasting. So for all those reasons, punishment tends to have kind of fallen out of the repertoire of people who are trying to create learning situations. Well, not all of them, but many of them. Okay, questions on any of that before we go on? Okay, so for the behaviorists, anytime you want to change a learned behavior, you end up having to change the animal's reinforcement and or punishment contingencies. So here is a more complete schematic of a Skinner box. So kind of a modern version, plexiglass all the way around. Here would be a food dispenser that comes out here. And then there'd be a lever to push and a couple of lights. This one has visual and auditory. And then this would be an electric grid, and then a little mild shock generator. And of course, these positive and negative outcomes are being tied to what the creature does. And what the experimenter usually does is very, very tightly controlled. So it's not like they just throw in a mix of things and see what happens, right? They actually have a very precise plan about how behavior is going to be related to contingencies. So just general. So oftentimes we're interested in the quantity of response, that is how often the creature is pressing the lever or doing whatever other behaviors we might be measuring. Okay. Again, just to kind of orient you to this. One of the interesting phenomenon, very much like what we see with classical conditioning, is this thing called extinction. So not only do we sometimes want behaviors to be changed, to sort of come on, but sometimes we want to get rid of them. Right? So you could have either learned intentionally or learned accidentally behaviors that are not good. And so a dog barking at every little thing, for example, something a dog can learn to do, not nice, right, when that happens. What are the things to do? Go to a dog trainer, because they can help you. Yelling at the dog, sometimes letting the dog out, or none of that's gonna work. Okay, but go to the dog trainer, they will fix it for you. Generally, unreinforced behaviors, here's the good news, will become extinguished. And I should say that throughout the kind of the rest of this, the word reinforcement here should always be read like reinforcement / punishment. Okay? There should be a top end word, but there isn't. Okay, so we tend to use reinforcement in that way. Okay? So unreinforced behaviors will be extinguished. So let's just think about classical conditioning. We already know about this in classical conditioning. If we get the conditioned stimulus presented repeatedly without the unconditioned stimulus, right, the bell without the food, we know we're going to get some sort of an extinction. Well, in operant conditioning, this is going to be the same kind of situation in which we have the operant being brought about. And so maybe the operant is pressing the lever, and the lever eventually just stops delivering food. Take a simple example. This too will get an extinction kind of event. And just like the kind of extinction we see in classical conditioning, we get what they sometimes refer to as suppression rather than an complete unlearning of it. And part of the evidence for this is this thing called spontaneous recovery. So here we have our barking dog. Okay. I hope this isn't you. It's not any fun. We're trying not to reinforce barking, but we're just not paying attention to you while you're barking. Really hard to do. And by some freaking miracle, this dog just isn't barking at all after the whatever it is that was reinforcing the dog has been taken away. Okay, so maybe it's your attention, right? But we have this phenomenon, which looks like it's maybe just a little fluctuation, a little unexplained hiccup, but actually is pretty reliable. You will have, even though you've broken the relationship, you'll have this spontaneous recovery, right? And then so on and so forth. It will then again go down. But even out here, you'll occasionally get these little spikes that are spontaneous recovery. And you can see it even more strongly here for the second extinction. We're almost done. All right, good. So let me leave you with this one little mystery. We've only got about a minute, which will leave for the next time. Right, I'll leave you with this mystery. So all very nice. You now have kind of the very basics of what Skinner had in mind, but Skinner wanted much, much more than this. Right, this is like there's a lever. Right, what Skinner wanted was that operant conditioning is going to explain very, very complex behavior, like really complex behavior, like language, like all your preferences, your day-to-day life is being completely shaped by your environment, is the claim by Skinner. Right? So here's the kind of logical problem that was pointed out to Skinner. For most of us, all of us, and many, many other species, the organism, right, needs to demonstrate the behavior to get reinforced. Right? That's the whole premise of the thing. You with me? I can't be reinforced if I don't do it. Okay? So we have kind of an origin problem. How can I come up with these like super complex behaviors out of all the things I can do in order to get them reinforced? Right? Because I mean, what's the chance of my doing something super duper complex just all of a sudden? Right? It's like zero. So if there are really complicated things like I'm doing with my my speech system, what's the chances of my doing one of those spontaneously without, like, how do I get there? See what I mean? Like, it's a real origin problem. It's people said, this is all very nice with the lever pushing, but how are you gonna get complex behavior to come out enough so that I can reinforce it? You know what I mean? It's a real puzzle, and people were like, hey, man, this isn't gonna work. Skinner has an answer called shaping, and we'll talk about that next week. Have a lovely weekend.